And welcome back, everybody. So we're talking about the Nikolas Cruz confession tape in its entirety. That's the great part about here on Law and Crime. We can cover the entire tape, and we will. We played a little bit of it for you before our last break, and now I want to dissect it a little bit more. And I have a great guest with me right now, joining me via Skype to talk about this. Joining me is juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Ashley, great to have you back here on Law and Crime.
Thank you, Jesse. Happy to be back.
I'm going to start off from the basic question. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, honestly not. And I just feel like after reading some of the transcript and watching some of it that you all have shown on Law and Crime, that it definitely is, he's upset he got caught more than necessarily there were demons in his head and he did something that he couldn't control.
So you don't believe the demon story? You don't believe he has a voice in his head?
My personal opinion, no, I don't believe it. Again, reading the transcript and looking at the videos, I think that he was upset he got caught. He is a little pathetic, I think, in terms of how he responds to the police.
Well, I got to tell you, there's a difference between the videos that he recorded on his cell phone before the shooting, where he's slamming his chest, he's so excited about shooting up this school, planning it out, and then the guy in that interrogation room who looks beaten and broken and crying and hoping to die. How do you reconcile those two different attitudes?
And I think that's where I struggle. I think, to me, watching the video he took on his cell phone, he is so purposeful and so many specific steps, well thought out, planned, deliberate, that I don't reconcile that with the pathetic. He's not a stupid guy, right? And I think that what we hear during the interrogation is his uh-oh, I've been caught and look what I did, oops.
Okay, so we have a lot to digest in this case, a lot to talk about, and we're going to go now back to his interrogation tape. And I want to play, people don't realize this, but he attended, or maybe they do, that he attended that high school. And this is the very school that he attacked. So this is when the detective starts talking to him about his experience at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Take a look. Pretty eerie stuff. Really, really eerie stuff. Listening to Nikolas Cruz about his past, about how he wanted to kill himself, his addiction to different kinds of drugs and alcohol. Want to bring back on Ashley Willcott to talk about this. Now, Ashley, I'm sure in your experience you've seen people who are suicidal, but is this a different level of it? What makes this a little bit different in your opinion?
Well, I think what's a little different, in my opinion, is obviously this child, juvenile, has issues, right? The fact that he committed the horrific crime that he did, he clearly has issues. And so now, as they're delving into these issues and questioning basically about his competency, whether or not you're on drugs, whether or not you understand what's true and what's a lie, you get into the meat of the matter, which is he's really, again, kind of pitiful and pathetic and just you can't really put it all together. I think that, again, he knew what he was doing. He did it with purpose, but he's just pathetic in his answers and his quiet demeanor and voice. It's fascinating, really.
So he exhibited a lot of signs before this shooting, and clearly he was suicidal. Are you surprised that he wasn't Baker acted, institutionalized for 72 hours against his consent, or somehow there was not enough attention brought to him before this happened? Are you surprised that he wasn't institutionalized or hospitalized or something of that nature before this happened?
Well, I'm remorseful that he wasn't. And so here's what I see almost every day in the state of Georgia where I am, but it's true nationwide. Someone has to make a threat against someone else or to themselves in order to be institutionalized. So at the point that he threatened suicide, it's absolutely appropriate, and he should have been institutionalized. The systemic issue we run into is if he didn't make that threat immediately within a time frame or threaten someone else, they may not take him at an institution. So I don't know the dynamics of this particular case, but I've seen that happen. And it's horrible.
And real quick, we have about 20 seconds or so. Is it hard to distinguish who's being honest about what they're really feeling and going to do as opposed to someone who maybe is just making it up?
Well, I think it can be hard, but I think the reality is we all have to assume they're truthful and it's honest and they're going to do it. We can't pretend like it may not happen.
Right. It's. I wonder if a lot of people who knew Nikolas and maybe observed him are having second guesses about that analysis, and that really became a big question after the shooting, and it's happening even more now because we're looking at his confession tape, we're hearing every word, and we're understanding from the shooter himself what was going on in his mind and what was happening in his life before this shooting. So Ashley, stand by. We're going to take a break on our end, and when we come back, we're delving more into the Nikolas Cruz confession tape. You don't want to miss anything. And also, we're going to talk a little bit more about an update with Larry Nassar. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. So we're talking about Nikolas Cruz right now. His confession tape was just released, and we are covering it in its entirety. This man faces 17 counts of first-degree murder, 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder in connection with the shooting that occurred at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School at Parkland, Florida. This horrific shooting. This man has been implicated. He is the they claim he is the shooter. It is a horrific set of circumstances, and now we are learning a little bit more from this man in his confession tape. We're going to play a little bit more of that in a bit, but before we do, there's always so many stories happening in the news, but here on Law and Crime, we always have a special report telling you what are the top trending stories of the day. Take a look.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. An appellate court in California upheld the conviction of convicted rapist and former Stanford University swimmer Brock Turner after his attorney attempted to have his conviction overturned. Turner's attorney argued that his client did not intend to rape the woman since he had his clothes on when he was caught. Turner was convicted of sexually assaulting an intoxicated woman after he was caught on top of the half-naked and unconscious woman by 2 Swedish graduate students. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, which caused outrage on social media. Turner is now required to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. A woman in Florida high on crystal meth and crack cocaine is facing charges after authorities found her running through a park naked. 40-year-old Danielle Teeples of St. Petersburg was arrested and reportedly told authorities she was running naked through the park to escape a giant spider. Teeples is facing a charge of indecent exposure. Larry Nassar, the disgraced former USA Gymnastics team doctor who sexually assaulted dozens of young girls, filed for a new sentencing hearing in Eaton County, claiming he did not receive due process. In court documents, his attorneys say they believe that Judge Richard Cunningham was pressured to impose the maximum sentence because of the highly publicized nature of the hearing. Nassar is currently serving a 60-year sentence in federal prison to be followed by up to 175 years in state prison for his child pornography and sexual assault convictions. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about that Larry Nassar situation. As you know, here on Law and Crime, we covered all of his sentencing hearings in their entirety, so we will always update you about what's happening with him. So let's bring back on Ashley Willcott, attorney, juvenile court judge, to talk a little bit more about it. Ashley, what is he arguing here, and does he have a grounds for a successful appeal?
Sure.
What's their argument here that he deserves a new trial in this county? We know that he's already in Ingham County with Judge Rosemary Aquilina. He said that she acted unfairly, but this is a different set of circumstances. What's he arguing here in this county?
Sure, Jesse. He's making two different arguments. One is that the sentencing was influenced unduly by the broader cultural aspect of what's going on with the Me Too movement. And the second is specifically that state sentences cannot run right after the federal sentence is completed.
Is there any validity in those arguments?
Listen, the only thing that raises my eyebrows is, as a judge, when they allege and include information that the judge actually showed admiration for some of the victim impact statements. Does that amount to enough misconduct or enough undue influencing that perhaps he should have a new sentencing hearing? Maybe. It bothers me. You know, a judge is not supposed to show any bias, and to show admiration for some of those statements, I think, arguably shows a bias and could influence the sentencing.
Okay, that may be true with the Ingham County one, with Judge Rosemary Aquilina. She was quite the character. She was very vocal about his actions, and she spoke favorably of each one of the survivors. But when you looked at Judge Cunningham, she was a little bit more reserved. And when I looked at that, I said, okay, this happened after Ingham County. So is that a factor in the sense that it happened after what happened in Ingham?
Right. By Judge Cunningham, I don't think that specifically is a factor, but I think it still affects the argument that on a broader basis, it was influenced by looking at the broader movement at the time. I don't think that's going to be a successful argument, Jesse.
Now, am I wrong, or is he also appealing his federal sentence as well? He was sentenced to 60 years in prison for federal pornography charges. That's a serious crime. So he was already serving 60 years in there. Is he trying to appeal that as well? And would he be successful in that appeal?
My recollection is he is also trying to appeal that, and I can look at it a little more in depth on a break because I can't remember all the specifics. Again, you know, the grounds to appeal a sentence, you better have something that's really obvious and really can warrant the new hearing. And a lot of the things that are going to be alleged, I don't think are going to warrant a new sentencing hearing.
All right, let me ask you the million-dollar question. Is there any chance, based upon what he's doing with all these three sentencing series, is there any chance that Larry Nassar will step foot out of a prison and live a life outside of prison?
Well, you know as well as I do, we never know what's going to happen in court. I do not believe that is going to happen. There's always a chance, but I don't see it happening in this particular case.
I would agree with you, but you never know what's happening, and this story keeps coming out in the news. You thought it was an open and shut case when Judge Rosemary Aquilina said, I just signed your death warrant. You thought you were never going to see this man again, but he keeps popping up in the news, popping up in the news. So, Ashley, thank you very much for your analysis about Larry Nassar. Again, you can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But here, we're going to switch gears ourselves, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what happened in Parkland, Florida. We're talking about the Nikolas Cruz police interrogation tape. And we're playing you bits of it so far. What I'm about to play for you is when he's going to be talking about what he did to animals. Now, we've seen this kind of behavior happen a lot with people who have killed before. Their treatment of animals has been a sign of things to come. So I'm going to play you right now. What did Nikolas Cruz do to animals? Take a look. As we listen word by word of the Nikolas Cruz confession tape or interrogation tape, I have to update you about something that's happening right now. The families of the victims that Cruz had allegedly shot are giving a press conference right now. Family members from all 17 victims are there. A spokesman, Tony Montalto, is speaking. He represents Stand with Parkland, a Stand with Parkland group formed by the families. And this press conference is about the failure of the Broward County School Board failing to prepare students and teachers for the upcoming school year. He said there's no unified plan to keep them safe. And this is all in the shadow of this new confession tape that came out. And we're going to cover more of what's happening with the families because we can't forget who was affected by this shooter. I want to bring back in Ashley Willcott to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing and hearing from the defendant. I got to ask you from a legal perspective here, do you see anything so far that would indicate the insanity defense, anything that would give the defense some ammunition, for lack of a better word?
Okay, no, I don't. Because again, obviously the kid has issues to do what he did, but I haven't seen, and actually let's talk about mass murderers statistically. Generally, they have exceedingly high IQs. So we need to know his IQ and whether or not he's manipulating this interrogation, which is what I think he's doing personally. The second thing, I just have to comment, Jesse, really briefly on the animals and killing. Statistically, again, I think 2014, there was a study, 90% of serial killers admitted to torturing or killing animals as kids.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's a common question that we see and also a common answer that keeps coming up. If you see people at a young age who do stuff to animals, it kind of gives a sign or foreshadowing of things that they do to humans later on. I can't say that's a blanket statement, but there is a correlation there. We see it a lot. Now, again, we will update our viewers about what's happening at that press conference with the family members of the victims from the Parkland shooting, but we are also going to talk a little bit more about the Nikolas Cruz interrogation tape. We have a lot more to play. So after our break, when we come back, we're going to talk about his depression and the things that were going on in his life that can give you a glimpse as to maybe why this all happened, because we're all trying to find answers in this really horrible tragedy. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Now, this is a really critical point in the confession tape. This is something that's been heard about throughout this case. As soon as it hit the news wire that this confession tape came on, you kept hearing instances of this, that a demon was telling him what to do. You kept hearing about this, a demon, a demon, a demon. That's what I want to talk about right now with Ashley Willcott and trying to understand how this fits into the insanity defense in Florida. So if he says that there is a demon controlling his actions and telling him what to do, is that insanity in Florida?
It has to have occurred at the time the crime was committed, and he has to prove it by clear and convincing evidence, which is a fairly high standard. So in the state of Florida, it presumes all people are sane. The defendant then has to prove it. And again, it has to be at the time the crime was committed. And there are two factors that he has to show one of. Either number one, Jesse, he was not able to understand the consequences of what he was doing, or number two, he understood the consequences, but he did not understand that what he was doing was wrong. He would have to prove one of those two things by clear and convincing evidence.
Okay, and the thing that's not helping him, right, is the fact that he made it a videotaped confession himself before, saying he knew he was going to be in the news. If he knew he was going to be in the news, didn't he know that what he was doing was wrong?
That would absolutely be what the prosecution would argue, and I agree with that. I think that video on his cell phone takes away the plausibility of any insanity defense for this particular defendant.
Okay, but on the flip side, let's play devil's advocate here. If he has a voice controlling him, and let's say at that moment this voice was telling him, you're right there, shoot all these people, shoot that person, shoot that person. If this voice is having a voice in your head, the kind of psychological issue that someone who pleads insanity, it might work? There might be something there?
Yes, it could work. But again, he has to show that that voice telling him to do it meant that he also did not understand the consequences, or in the alternative, that the consequences were bad. So it's that next step. I've seen it rarely work, but it could.
Now, I hope we can show it. One of the family members of the victim said this was total BS, that this voice in his head, this is entirely doesn't make any sense, that he doesn't believe it. If we have it, I'll put it up. How do we know if he actually has a voice in his head? How does a mental evaluation like that happen?
Well, that's what has to happen. It's called a competency evaluation if the defense chooses to do that and argue insanity, which I'm sure they will in this case. And that competency evaluation is by a professional, by an expert who knows what test to administer to determine whether or not they think it's possible that that did happen at the time. I don't believe it's going to be successful in this case personally, but again, they're going to have to hire the experts for that.
Well, by all accounts, it seems to be going to trial because the defense attorneys will say he'll plead guilty if they choose not to elect the death penalty and he gets life in prison. The prosecution has said, we're not taking it off the table. And that tweet that I just put up there kind of could be an image of what a potential jury might have to think, whether or not this was a bogus confession or a true confession. And trying to get a jury to sit for this case, I wonder how we might be able to get that. And maybe Ashley and I will talk a little bit more about it after this short break, because when we come back, there's a lot more to discuss in this case. Stay tuned. I mean, you could just look at him, and it's pretty fascinating to watch. I want to bring back in juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. As we listen to the words of this man, what red flags stick out at you that maybe someone should have noticed before this shooting?
And Jesse, you brought this up earlier when you said, should he be in a hospital? There are so many red flags. First of all, he shot a chicken. The police were called. Somebody knew about it. Second of all, he shot live game birds, and they knew about that. He got in a fight in school where he was embarrassed. As a result, he said he started failing out, and then he had to stop going to that school, and they put him in another school. Every one of these things are red flags. Somebody knew about it. Somebody should have done something to get him help and treatment for each of those things. We may not have ended up here if that had happened.
At the very least, he was extremely suicidal. Are you surprised that somebody who exhibited this behavior was able to get multiple guns?
Right? I mean, that whole part of his confession when he says he just went into the shop and he bought them, and one had a magazine, it cost $560. Yes, it does surprise me given his age. So I'm eager to learn more around that the law enforcement will find in the course of their investigation.
I wonder, and this is the argument, the back and forth with it, if he couldn't get his hands on weapons, which would have been the most practical way to kill a bunch of people, would he have gone in to school that day with knives or rocks or anything else, maybe a homemade bomb, something to go there and cause havoc?
I think so. So my belief is even if he had not been able to get hold of guns, he would have done something like a homemade bomb. He would have found a way to commit the crime, in my opinion, even without the guns. The guns just make it easy and quick, so to speak, to kill a lot of people.
You know, it's fascinating what we're learning in this confession, and also in when he recorded those phone confessions beforehand, is that he really has no value in his own life. He keeps saying that his life means nothing. He lives a solitary life. He wants to die. He asks the officer at one point to kill him, just kill me. And so we're going to talk more about what's going on in the mind of Nikolas Cruz. And as I always say, it's a scary place to be. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody. Before we go into the Nikolas Cruz case, which is what we're talking about his confession tape. I want to give you an update right now. We've been following the presser that was given by the family members of the victims, and they kept talking about the accountability at the school. How have things changed since that shooting? A spokesman for the group Stand with Parkland spoke. His name is Tony Montalto, and he said the head of security is still in place. The same person who was there when our loved ones were murdered in that school is still in charge. Where is the accountability? Again, the presser is over. It was all about urging the community to vote for a new school board members that will be more concerned with school safety, a major issue, especially at that school. And if there's any update there, we'll let you know. But before we get back into Nikolas Cruz, and trust me, there's a lot to talk about there. There's always so much happening in the news. There's so many stories. So we have a very special report about what else is happening around the country.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. An appellate court in California upheld the conviction of convicted rapist and former Stanford University swimmer Brock Turner after his attorney attempted to have his conviction overturned. Turner's attorney argued that his client did not intend to rape the woman since he had his clothes on when he was caught. Turner was convicted of sexually assaulting an intoxicated woman after he was caught on top of the half-naked and unconscious woman by 2 Swedish graduate students. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, which caused outrage on social media. Turner is now required to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. A woman in Florida high on crystal meth and crack cocaine is facing charges after authorities found her running through a park naked. 40-year-old Danielle Teeples of St. Petersburg was arrested and reportedly told authorities she was running naked through the park to escape a giant spider. Teeples is facing a charge of indecent exposure. Larry Nassar, the disgraced former USA Gymnastics team doctor who sexually assaulted dozens of young girls, filed for a new sentencing hearing in Eaton County, claiming he did not receive due process. In court documents, his attorneys say they believe that Judge Richard Cunningham was pressured to impose the maximum sentence because of the highly publicized nature of the hearing. Nassar is currently serving a 60-year sentence in federal prison to be followed by up to 175 years in state prison for his child pornography and sexual assault convictions. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Anthony, you always pick the best stories. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about the top trending stories of the day. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Larry Nassar case, considering the fact that we covered it here on Law and Crime, gavel to gavel. Every one of those sentencing hearings, every one of those survivor impact statements were brought forth. So we got to talk about any updates in that case. Want to bring back on juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott to talk about this. What is he arguing here, Ashley? What is his basis for the argument here, saying that in Eaton County, which, by the way, wasn't where Judge Rosemary Aquilina was, and we all know that he's trying to fight that one, that was Ingham County. What is he arguing that there was something improper going on in Eaton County?
So in Eaton County, he's arguing 2 specific things. One is he is saying that judge, who's Judge Cunningham, actually has already been exposed to all the improper factors that happen in the other county because of all the attention to it, and that she therefore cannot be unbiased in sentencing. The second thing that he's arguing, looking at my notes, is that he is saying, even with Judge Cunningham and Eaton, that it is not that he will not receive an individualized sentence, and so he wants it to have a new hearing because it wasn't individualized to him. Those are his arguments anyway.
So is that because this happened after everything that happened in Ingham County? And remember, that was a little bit, you could say it was a little bit of a spectacle. You had all of the survivors come out, and Judge Rosemary Aquilina spoke to each one of the survivors. She chastised him. She said, "I signed your death warrant," handed it. It was very dramatic. It was great to watch, and I don't think anybody feels sympathy for Larry Nassar. But this Eaton one happened after that. What would have happened if it happened before Ingham? Do you think he would have had any grounds?
No, not the grounds that he's currently alleging anyways. Absolutely, that's the difference, because it happened after. So it's all timing from his perspective and his current legal arguments.
So how could he say that this Judge Cunningham, was influenced, she was pressured to deliver a harsh sentence? I mean, does that really work outside of this case?
I think he wanted to come up with some kind of argument, because honestly, I did look, and Jesse, he has appealed all 3 of his sentences from 3 different courts. And so that's the nature of what he's going to do. He had to come up with an argument. And he's saying that it, again, is because of the movement across the country and the cultural, and that's been taken into account by this judge, and that she couldn't help but take that into account.
Don't you love that he makes himself the victim in all of this? And even we heard a little bit during the sentencing hearing. Are you surprised that he's fighting all 3? Is there any which way that he could be successful and maybe one day in the future get out of prison?
Well, I think narcissistic ego has ensured that he's going to appeal all of these. I do not think he's ever going to get out of prison. I don't think he thinks he did anything wrong, so of course he's going to appeal.
Were you, how should I say this? It was great to watch it, okay? And again, nobody feels sympathy for Larry Nassar, but when Judge Rosemary Aquilina in the Ingham County case, she was very vocal. She was very colorful, very dramatic. Was there anything that you viewed as inappropriate in her comments that would be grounds for a new sentencing hearing?
Well, I do think that she overstepped her bounds as a judge, because as a judge, you cannot have any bias. And to me, some of the comments she made in support of victims indicated possible bias. So I did have a problem, and I do think it was improper.
Well, it's great that we have you as a judge to speak on that point. So, Ashley, thank you for that. We're going to come back to you in a minute. We're going to talk now about the Nikolas Cruz confession tape. This is a major component of it. We've been talking so much about the demons in his head and what he suffered and how his parents are no longer here. He suffered from depression. He was killing animals. Let's talk a little bit more about why this happened and why he never got help. Take a look.
Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Don't adjust your sets. I'm not Jesse Weber. I'm Aaron Keller, stepping in for Jesse, who we are sorry to say forgot to sign out, despite his otherwise perfection at this seat. So we're talking about the Nikolas Cruz case. Ashley Willcott is still on the line with us, former juvenile court judge, current attorney. Ashley, what do you make of this in totality? I'm just sort of sitting down here and diving into some of this. I looked at some of it yesterday. I mean, how do you process this?
So first of all, hi, Aaron. Nice to see you. The second piece of that is really we have to, again, look at everything he's saying and whether or not we think it's going to lend to an insanity defense, meaning that he was actually insane, quote unquote, at the time the crime occurred. And so looking at the whole picture, I don't think he's going to be able to prove that. But those are the aspects of this defense are going to argue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really I'm understanding that, but you know, we watched the officer doing the interrogation really kind of needle back at him and say, you know, I don't really believe this whole thing about voices in your head. It becomes a tricky factual matter to figure out whether or not he's really telling the truth about this, whether he is indeed suffering from some mental health condition, or whether or not it's a story that he's sort of cooking up to try to evade responsibility in some fashion.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've seen on the bench and in my experience is this. We know that at some point in time he is going to have evaluations, whether the prosecution requests or the defense chooses to do so. And what he tells those experts in the process of having these mental health evaluations or competency evaluations or psychological examinations is going to be compared in terms of the details to what he has said during his confession. And one of the things that always is telltale is whether or not every detail he says about when he heard voices and what he heard is going to be the same both in his confession and then at a subsequent mental health evaluation.
Yeah, there's plenty to wrap our heads around. One point of this that really stuck out in my head, and I know we haven't gotten there quite yet, is when he starts to ask for an attorney, but my understanding is that it may not have been clear enough for it to trigger the right to counsel, because once that is invoked, they have to shut down the interrogation legally. That's the part I really want to zero in on.
Right. I absolutely agree with you, and I need to hear that part again, but that's what defense is going to argue. So we do need to know, was it a clear request for an attorney or not?
Yeah, there's plenty to dial into, to continue to look at as we continue to look at this interrogation of Nikolas Cruz. We are going to be back with more of that interrogation here on the Law and Crime Network. Again, Cruz is the one who admitted to interrogators he shot 17 people, killing them at the Parkland, Florida high school. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back, everyone. We're continuing to listen to those interrogation recordings of accused Parkland, Florida school shooter Nikolas Cruz. Ashley Willcott is still on the line with me here on the Law and Crime Network. Ashley, a couple of things stuck out to me there. One was some discussion about whether or not he was posting online on social media, and I thought that I heard him deny it. There was a lot of back and forth when this case originally happened as to whether or not he had posted some threats or warnings on social media before the attack commenced.
That's right. And so you notice that the interrogator police officer actually said, "Is this you? They posted as Nikolas Cruz. Isn't it you?" And he did kind of deny it. But what's interesting is we've also seen the video of prior to the school shooting of all his plan and how he was going to kill people and all steps he was going to take to do it. So I think they're going to connect those dots, but he certainly did deny it in this particular interview.
Yeah, now, we've talked a couple of times about what was going on inside his head. You've done a lot of juvenile justice work. He's a younger individual here. What should have happened? Is there anything that could have prevented this?
I think so. So I do a lot of prevention work, and I appreciate the question. So listen, he starts talking about killing his first animal at age 13. The police knew about the shooting of that chicken. So there are people that knew and were aware of, and all the different things that have happened between the age 13 and now, if not sooner. Failing out of school, getting in a fight at school, having to go to a different school, the voices in his head that he says happened every day, killing of animals on multiple occasions. All of these things are red flags. And so someone who knew about each of these isolated incidents should have been paying attention to say we can get him some help.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay, we're going to take another quick break here, Ashley. We're going to probably continue down that chain of thought as we continue to listen to these harrowing recordings from Nikolas Cruz, the accused shooter. We'll be right back. And folks, that was one of the most compelling parts of the Nikolas Cruz interrogation. It's been released thus far by Florida authorities. He, of course, is the young man accused of shooting and killing 17 people at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day this year. Ashley Willcott is still on the line with us here at the Law and Crime Network. Ashley, in that clip, we heard a lot of critical words come out of the defendant's mouth, but one of the things he asked for was an attorney. Was it an ambiguous request or a clear request? And of course, you know the reason I'm asking.
I do. I thought it was a really clear request because he said, "I want an attorney." Now, after that, he was muttering some things that I couldn't hear or understand. But I think as soon as he says that, you notice law enforcement came back with, "Oh, it's the demon asking for an attorney." I don't care which personality or which voice asked for an attorney. I think he clearly requested, and therefore the questioning has to stop.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking the same exact thing, but I know that some courts have gotten a lot more, less clear, I guess I could say, about exactly when the invocation of counsel requires an interrogator to shut down. It has to be clear. It has to be unambiguous. I've seen some courts turn around and say, hey, look, you have to not only request an attorney, but you have to make it clear you're requesting an attorney about the subject matter the police are trying to question you about. That you have to spit out this magic saying, I am asking for an attorney about the matter about which you are interrogating me, and then shut up, and then they have to stop.
But I think when you have a defendant like this who's saying, I heard voices and these are all the things wrong with me and why I may have done it, you know defense is going to likely raise insanity defense. Don't play with that, because the defense is going to argue he asked for an attorney right then and there. Nothing else said after that can be used against him. So in this particular case, I think it was ambiguous, was not ambiguous enough to cause. Okay, let me just start over here. And in this particular case, I think that they should absolutely treat that as a clear request for an attorney.
You know, I would judge it the same way. I'd really have to look at the case law down there in Florida to see exactly how they handle this, because as I said, you know, usually it used to be, as soon as we figured this out, the constitutional right to an attorney, when one is requested, the interrogation has to shut down. And that has gotten a little bit more squishy legally as time has gone on. So you've got that issue in there. And then after this, you know, the detective leaves, but then they send the brother in. Does that count as a custodial interrogation in your book or not?
In my book, it absolutely does. I think it still gets the information on videotape where they can try to use it against him. Yes, I think that they should not have even sent the brother in, just for the sake of clarity, because of some of the squishy laws around this. Don't play with it and do it the right way.
I can see that as well. So look, we're going to continue to break down the Nikolas Cruz interrogation when we return from a brief break here on the Law and Crime Network. Welcome back yet again, folks. We are continuing to talk about the Nikolas Cruz interrogation recording released by Florida authorities. Nikolas Cruz, of course, is the young man accused of shooting and killing 17 people at the Parkland High School earlier this year. Ashley Willcott has been on the line with us. Ashley, I know you have to run. We really appreciate you helping us break down the legal issues in this recording.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you having me.
Okay, we are going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about a couple of other cases that we've covered here on the Law and Crime Network. Before we get into that, though, let's get you caught up to speed on the top headlines making news.